Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Tuesday topic. Today's topic is clinical assessment, the role of culture and ethnicity. And our speaker today is a Drexel alum, Dr. Barbara Hanna from the DCFT program. Today's presentation is presented by the CNHP Board of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Dr. Veronica Carey, PhD Chair. All right, and so without further ado, let me throw it over to you, Dr. Hanna, to take it away.
Thank you so much. All right, let me share my screen here so I can open up my PowerPoint. All right, wonderful. So I can't see all of you. I can only see a few people. So I usually like when I talk like this for it to be a bit more interactive. I know me personally, I don't even like to talk and things like this. I like to put things in the chat or whatever, which is absolutely fine if you want to do that. But if you want to talk, please, you don't have to leave questions or comments till the end. Just raise your hand so I know you want to say something, and we can talk about it as I talk. All right. So like Darren said, I'm going to be talking about clinical assessment, the role of culture and ethnicity in clinical assessment. And before I do that, all right, let me tell you a little bit about me, because I don't know if there's anyone here who actually knows me. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm licensed in New Jersey and New York, not PA, even though we're in PA right now, because I only moved here recently. I haven't applied for reciprocity yet, so hopefully I'll get that soon. So I got my doctorate from Drexel just last year, and I got my master's from Seton Hall, which is in North Jersey, if you guys are not familiar with that. And I'm here, even though I'm not a student anymore, because I'm still part of the Board of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with Dr. Carey. And I just want to say I am in no way an expert on culture and ethnicity, right? This isn't really an area of expertise. Most of what I'm going to talk about is from personal experience, my own personal life experience and my professional experience as a therapist. So it's not coming from nowhere, but it's also not like a number one area of expertise for me. So I welcome any and all comments, from you guys. Right? I want to hear from you. I want it to be as conversational as possible. I'm going to focus on, I know people here may not all be therapists or any be therapists like me. So I'm going to focus on clinical assessment as it pertains to psychotherapy, because that's my area of expertise. But I'm going to try to keep it as general as possible so that it can still, whatever information we talk about can still be applied to other health professions. Okay. So like I said, not an expert on this academically. It's not going to come from nowhere. I'm still going to use some research to support my arguments, but how I structured this is it's not going to be a research focused presentation, right? That's not my purpose here. I want it to be conversational. I want it to be something based on experiences. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Actually, I'm going to show a little video, which is going to be one of the reasons why I think it's more helpful when it's more conversational rather than just listing research as support for what I'm saying. Not that that's not valuable, but there are other reasons for why conversational and experiential talking like this may be more helpful when it comes to things like this. So I'm going to use my experience as a therapist and my expertise as a therapist and as someone. I put here, we'll talk about the details here about how I identify, but as someone just from my personal experiences, my own culture, my own ethnicity, my own race, I'll talk about that to help support what I'm going to talk about here. And I just want to emphasize, right, even though I'm talking about culture and ethnicity, I'm not forgetting about race. I'm just not talking about it as much here, right? I just want to emphasize ethnicity and culture, not forgetting about race whatsoever. I don't want anyone to get that impression, okay? If it's okay, Darren is going to help me with the video because I had a little issue working it on my end. So Darren, if you could turn on the first video, which is the TED Talk, and I'd like to stop it at 5:51. If you can.
All right.
Last week, I walked out of a training from my colleagues feeling a sense of exhaustion and frustration. And this is not the first time I have felt this way. When I leave these trainings, I typically feel like they have doubled down on stereotypes rather than providing me with ways to address my biases and practice anti-racism. Cultural competency and diversity trainings are so prevalent these days, and they should be, as we venture to a space of acknowledging, addressing, and understanding the impact that power, prejudice, and privilege has on this world and all those that reside in it. However, the truth is, typically when I attend these trainings, I find them to be a waste of my time. And that is heartbreaking to me because we are worse off due to these poor trainings that do not provide us with ways to improve the human experience. I take personal offense to these lackluster trainings because in the many roles that I hold, I see the impact that subpar cultural understanding, limited cultural humility, and outdated cultural knowledge has on the world. I see the impact as a professor. When my students come to me and share that once again they have been invalidated and the victims of racism by my colleagues in academia. I see the impact as a scientist when I look at statistic after statistic regarding the number of Black patients and patients of the global majority that feel seen when they visit their doctors. These patients are significantly more likely to be misdiagnosed because the biases that their doctors hold impact their ability to do an appropriate assessment and do their job. I see the impact as a licensed clinical psychologist when I work with patient after patient after patient regarding ways to deal with the impact of oppression that they experience in the workplace, in their neighborhoods, and sometimes in their own families. And I see the impact as a Black woman in America who often has to convince others that I am not a threat simply because of the color of my skin or the fact that my hair defies gravity. I see the impact every day. You know, so many people attempt to teach about cultural competence and the role of cultural competence without understanding the history behind the term. Did you know that when professor and psychologist Dr. Daryl Wingsu coined the phrase cultural competence, he stated that it is not possible to be fully versed on a group of people in your lifetime. It's true. He actually stated that it is more important to have experiential learning, to engage with people that don't look like you, who from different walks of life as human beings, than it is to focus on the academic trainings, the cognitive understanding that so many of these diversity trainings seek to embody. But that's not really how we're taught cultural competence, is it? Every year we are mandated to go to at least one mandatory training. Most of the time, it is in February. We all know why it is typically in February. And then we see a speaker, we watch a webinar, we check off a box, we get the certificate, and too often the education ends there. No afterthought, no follow-up, no experiential learning. And that was never how it was meant to be. When we treat cultural competence like an achievable goal, like a finish line to be crossed, we completely miss the mark. And we do injustice to all those that will be significantly impacted by our ignorance, by our insensitivity, and by our inconsideration. I unfortunately have witnessed many incidents of poor cultural competence, but one that always sticks with me was during a panel, a planning session between licensed clinical psychologists. The purpose of the session was to identify ways to teach distress tolerance to a group of Black youths. We typically do this by stimulating some form of stress that is deemed reasonable, and then allowing the children to practice their coping skills in a safe environment. This is typically done by showing a scary movie clip, but this year, a psychologist proposed that they change the scene to a scene from the movie Crash, which depicted police brutality. The offenders were European American police officers and the victims were a Black couple. I want you to think of how abominable a decision it was for licensed mental health professionals whose job it is to contribute to the mental healing of youths to decide that showing a scene that depicted police brutality would create what is deemed as a reasonable amount of distress in Black youths. I often wonder what contributes to these poor decision-making, especially among licensed mental health professionals. I believe it happens because the way we seek to understand and learn more about individuals from diverse backgrounds and cultures is limited to Zoom meetings and workshops and webinars. I want to share some data with you so I can fully help you understand and humanize the experience of what poor cultural competence contributes to. Black boys and girls are respectively 3 and 6 times more likely to be suspended from school than their European American peers for displaying the same behaviors. In 2003, the Institute of Medicine published a 700-page document entitled Unequal Treatment. This revealed that Black patients have a higher mortality rate when it comes to heart disease, cancer, and AIDS.
I think, what is it up to? This is good. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much. All right, let me share my screen again. Oops, sorry. Where's the... Okay, so I failed to present who was in this video. It's Dr. Raquel Martin. She's a psychologist. I don't know that much about her, to be honest. I came across her talk and I found it to be interesting and helpful. And I want to tell you some of the reasons why I included her as a little introduction. So, I mean, she makes a good point, I think, about the idea that why a lot of these cultural competence trainings may not be as helpful, right? And I don't want this, what I'm about to do right now, to turn into something like that. So, and that's why I want to try to make it as experiential as possible, in the sense that I'm going to be sharing about myself, about my personal life. And I hope that you don't have to share about yourselves, obviously, but I hope that it can turn into some kind of conversation. And I hope that a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today are things that I hope will dispel some, not all, but some of these biases that she was referring to, because there's a lot of biases when it comes to things like this. And I especially liked what she said when she was talking about where the term cultural competence even comes from, that it is not possible to be fully versed in things like this. And that's not my intention here, right? I'm not all-knowing with this, right? I just want to introduce a couple of things that I have noticed, bring them to light for you, and we can have a discussion about it. Okay, so 2 things that I've noticed. 2 assumptions that I feel are not helpful when people make these assumptions. Number 1 is that when individuals present for therapy, or in general, but when individuals present for therapy and appear, quote unquote, white, it may be automatically assumed that they follow American culture. That's number 1. And number 2 is the assumption that when individuals fall under the same race, it may be automatically assumed that their ethnicity and cultures are similar. That's number 2. And those are 2 assumptions that I don't feel are always correct, but I do feel that even I sometimes fall into, these biases and make these assumptions incorrectly. Before we get into that, I mean, race, ethnicity, culture, these are terms that we hear a lot, and I just wanted to define them. You probably already know definitions, right? I just wanted to define them very quickly so that we're all on the same page about them. And I'm not going to show a lot of videos, but this is just one other time where I'm going to show a video that I thought, the speaker in this video, it's a short video, did a very good job of defining them. I have definitions here as well from, an article, but this video, I think, help differentiate in a very good way, in my opinion, the differences between race and ethnicity, because they're often used interchangeably, but I don't think they should be, because they're not the same thing. It talked about the differences between race and ethnicity, and the connection of culture, where that falls in within race and ethnicity. I feel like this individual did that well. So I'll go into this video, but first, I'll read out the definitions that I have here. So race, defined as a social construct based on perceived physical differences, such as skin color, that society deems significant. Ethnicity, characterized as a social grouping based on shared nationality, language, history, traditions, and cultural practices. And culture, described as a learned and shared system of meanings, beliefs and values that are transmitted through shared activities, evolving over time and shaped by individuals to interpret the world around them. And Darren, if it's okay, I'm going to stop. Give me 1 second. I'm going to stop sharing again. And if you could share that other video, that would be great. And that would be the last video.
What is race? What is ethnicity? Is there a difference? Can you define race? When I say the word race, what do you think of? What's your race? What's my race? When we think of race in the United States, we often think of Black, white, Native American, and Asian. We sometimes think Middle Easterner or Latinx, but we'll get back to that later. Race in the United States refers to physical features, but it refers to very specific physical features, ones that correspond to European ideas of difference. For example, skin color is one physical feature associated with race. In the 1700s, European scientists described the people of Africa as Black, the people of the Americas as red, and the people of Asia as yellow. However, the continent of Africa has every skin color on the human spectrum, as do the Americas and Asia. Europe is the only continent with relatively little variation in skin color. Thus, it's no surprise that Europeans focus on skin color as an important distinction between people. The idea of race is linked to 18th century European scientists in another important way. They came up with the idea that we can know something about someone's personality and behavior based on how they look. We see a person and use race to assess whether they're good at basketball, math, or English literature. Another unique feature of race is that it's something you get from your parents. If I know the race of your parents, then I know your race as well. Race then refers to a group of people imagined to share physical features, a common ancestry, and cultural and moral attributes. Race is also externally imposed. I look at you and I determine what I think your race is. The idea of race is slightly different from the concept of ethnicity. Ethnicities are group identity based on notions of shared history, culture, and kinship. Ethnicity also has a distinct history from race. And unlike race, ethnicity doesn't always imply a hierarchy. People self-identify as belonging to an ethnic group on the basis of their understanding of their history and culture. There may only be a few races, but there are thousands of ethnicities. Ethnicities refer to people who are minorities within a larger context. Some examples of ethnicities include Polish people in Brazil, Algerians in France, and Koreans in the United States. There are also ethnic groups within racial groups. The Black population in the United States, for example, includes Nigerian Americans, Dominican Americans, Jamaican Americans, and African Americans, all of whom have their distinct histories and cultures. Of course, in Nigeria, Nigerians have their own ethnic groups, including Igbos, Hausas, and Yorubas, all of whom speak their own language and have their own traditions. Ethnicities are thus layered and relational in important ways. A person may consider themselves Igbo when encountering a Yoruba, Nigerian American when they meet a Haitian American, African American when talking to an Italian American, and simply American when traveling in France. So what about Latinxes and Middle Easterners? Are they a race or an ethnicity? There's no consensus on that, so I'll have to let you decide. But I will leave you with these two definitions to help you figure this out. Race is an externally imposed categorization based on certain physical features, such as skin color and hair texture, a common ancestry, and cultural and moral attributes. Ethnicity is a self-defined group identity based on shared kinship, history, and culture.
Thank you. All right. Before I move on, does anyone disagree or have another definition for any of these, race, ethnicity, culture, that they want to share?
Hi, it's Dr. Carey. I
Hi.
don't have any corrections, Dr. Hannah. I just want to celebrate that you started off where you started off in terms of your title having ethnicity and culture in there, and that as a part of the board, which I know that you're a member, and I think I see a couple of other members here, but for those of you that are not, we talk about the 6 freedom words when we start the board year. And being able to achieve cultural competence, we say is not achievable. So I don't know what year, I think you said Dr. Rosalind, I could have gotten her name wrong, but when I don't know what year that TED Talk was.
I think it was 2020, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Maybe something,
great.
Not too long ago.
Okay, great. So I'm glad to see that we have another sort of corroboration for why we talk about how cultural competence is not achievable, and that the 6 freedom words, race, ethnicity, culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm glad to see that in your definition of race, you don't stop with it's a social construct. People want to put a period there and then move on to ethnicity. I'm glad that your illustrations and the video corroborating that race, they pretty much said 4 categories, and you could decide if you think Middle Eastern, Southeast Asian rather, and Latinx are a race or an ethnicity. So I celebrate how you're giving us a strong foundation. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, feel free to jump in later on if you have any other ideas. So for assessment, this isn't really a definition per se, not like an exact definition, but I wanted to include for assessment what I meant by assessment, right? When I talk about assessment, so that you know what I'm talking about when I say assessment, because people could think assessment is like completing some kind of evaluation. It's not what I'm referring to here. When I refer to assessment, I think of assessment in a, as a therapist, I think of assessment as a continuing process. I continually assess throughout my work, right? This isn't a one-time thing, although it usually occurs mostly in the beginning of the work during my intake, and is very important for case conceptualization, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on. But I just want you to know when I say assessment, I'm talking about that assessment, that information collecting and making sense of it kind of that occurs for me as a therapist when I'm trying to make connections in my work, and also related to the intake and all that information that I collect during my intake. So I'm not going to focus too much on this, but I just wanted to include at least one slide to talk about what we already know, because I think most people would agree that it is very important to include and or explore culture and ethnicity when assessing, right? Any kind of assessment. I'm not just talking about me as a therapist, but when assessing, so in your fields as well. Would anyone disagree with that? Maybe? No? I mean, I think most people would agree on it. Obviously, there is a lot of research on it. I'm not going to go into all the research. I only picked a few papers that I thought it supported the idea, that it's important to explore culture and ethnicity. So these are just a couple. It's not everything there is, but one size does not fit all. Taking diversity, culture, and context seriously discusses the critical need for serious attention to diversity, culture, and context in mental health care. Impact of race, ethnicity, and culture on the expression and assessment of psychopathology. It provides an overview and framework for understanding race, ethnicity, and culture as factors that affect adult psychopathology. And towards cultural competence in mental health delivery, highlights the role of culture in the conceptualization of mental illness and the phenomenology of mental illness across cultures. These are just a few. These are not all there are, right? But I just wanted to present at least a little support for this before I go into my other points. Okay. So what's new then? So if we already know that culture and race are important, what's new? Why am I even talking about this, right? And I'm talking about this because, like I said in the beginning, I want to emphasize ethnicity and culture, right? Not deleting race. I just want to emphasize ethnicity and culture. And I want to talk about one of the 2 points that I introduced in the beginning. And one of those 2 points is that when individuals present for therapy and appear white, quote unquote white, it may be automatically assumed that they follow American culture. I see it. I have done it personally, and I'm going to talk about an example where I did it, right? I think it's pretty common, but I'm going to talk about my example, and you can think of either you can disagree or you can think of an example. If you want to provide an example on your end, that's fine. So this is a client, but obviously it's not identifiable. I changed everything around. So I had a client who identified as Caucasian. He looked quote unquote white, right? He spoke English well, and he showed no external indication of identifying with any other ethnicity or culture that one may deem a minority, right? On his intake, he said that he had a European background. Most of the time, if I'm working with someone and they identify as Caucasian and I'm like, well, what does that really mean, or something like that, to kind of get to the roots, their answer is usually, well, I'm just American, right? And if I push a little further, their answer is, well, I have some roots in, from Ireland or whatever their answer is from generations ago, right? So I assumed that was him, and I shouldn't have made that assumption, but that was my assumption in that moment, right? In reality, though, as we explored further, I found out that he had immigrated to the US as a teenager and that he had a large struggle adjusting to the culture here, right? I'm not going to share which country he came from, but it was a European country, right? And it was still a struggle for him to adjust here because the beliefs, the traditions, the culture was different, right? And if I had left that out, if I had not explored that, I would be missing a big, big chunk of his life. I mean, our beliefs, they make us who we are, right? Our culture, our traditions, our beliefs, they shape us, right? And that is culture. That was related to his ethnicity, not his race, in that moment, at least, right? But I also don't want to forget the opposite, right? So vice versa, over here, I'm going to talk about the opposite of that because there is an opposite assumption as well, that when individuals present for therapy and appear not white, it may be automatically assumed that they do not follow American culture, right? So I'm going to use myself as an example here. On paper, I'm Caucasian because in the last video, the woman was describing that there is, some people, I'm Middle Eastern, and some people would consider that a race, but it doesn't matter what people consider it if I can't put it on paper. So on paper, I have to put Caucasian because that's what I have to put, right? So over the phone, I speak English just fine. When I say over the phone, I'm talking about when people can't see me physically, my skin tone. I'm an American citizen. I've lived here my whole life, but people can look at me and think, well, she probably doesn't follow American culture. Not everyone. I don't want to make a generalization, right? I'm just saying that sometimes what happens is clinicians may look at someone and see that they look quote unquote different and assume that they don't follow American culture. And I don't want us to go to that extreme either, right? Balance is important, right? And I'm just going to share an example about myself, right? I know that I'm Egyptian American. And if I were to go and see another Egyptian American therapist, there aren't really many of us, but even if I were to find one and go, that is what happens most of the time, is that there's some over-identification. And there's an idea that because I am Egyptian, I must strictly follow that culture and not really follow American culture that much, right? And I don't think it's helpful to go to that extreme either. And I think both assumptions can be unhelpful. And point number 2 that I talk about here is the assumption that when individuals fall under the same race, it may be automatically assumed that their ethnicity and cultures are similar. And this is something that is from the video as well that I heard that woman refer to. I apologize, I don't have her name. It was a random video I found that I liked on YouTube. But 2 ethnicities or more that fall under the same race could have very different cultures. I tried my best to pick 2 ethnicities here that are that appear similar on the surface, but they're not. English people, for example, usually are reserved, individualistic, formal. Greek people are expressive, collectivistic, loud, social, more traditional, and focus more on religion than English people, usually. I'm not stereotyping, I'm just talking about the usual culture. Even within the quote unquote white category, racial category, if we're talking about race, there can be so many different ethnicities that fall under there. So many. In fact, if I'm going to talk about myself a little bit here again as well, even within the same country, there may be differences in culture as well. Within the same ethnicity even. Well, I mean, I don't know if I should say within the same ethnicity. I'll say within the same country. So again, for me, on paper, I'm Caucasian. Yeah, culturally, I'm very different than many of the other ethnicities listed here under the Caucasian category because I'm Egyptian American. And even within the Egyptian culture, there are still some differences because I'm Coptic. And I don't think a lot of people know what that is, but it is an ethnic minority. Coptic is the language that was spoken in Egypt before Arabic entered Egypt. It's a very old thing, but it is an ethnicity. People think of it as a religion. Sure, it is a specific Christian denomination, but it is also an ethnicity, right? So even within Egypt, I am seen differently, and there are different cultures and traditions, even within the same country. So why is this important for clinical assessment? Before I get to this, I said I wanted to give a little time. Oops, no. I wanted to give sorry, let me share my screen again. Does anyone want to support, refute what I'm saying about these 2 points, these 2 assumptions that I had here? I'm going to open them up again. Because not everyone may agree with this. These are my perspectives based on, again, my personal experiences personally, and also my experiences as a therapist, things I've observed within other therapists, even. So, does anyone have any ideas about how this may be different from your perspective or the same, if you want to provide an example? Yes, Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm another member of the board. I just wanted to say that I agree with what you're saying and that assumptions can be very harmful, especially when there's so much nuance to a person's life and their upbringing of not just their lived experience, but also the way that maybe their parents' lives have somehow influenced themselves. For me in particular, my dad immigrated from Hong Kong, and some of those traditions that were instilled in his family I learned about, but have a different relationship to it than perhaps he did because I grew up here in the United States.
Yes, Nicole, I think you bring up a good point about we're not just talking about ethnicity and culture here as it pertains to a single group, but with immigration put in there, right? Our values, our beliefs, they do change. And then that gets passed down to children who have different values and beliefs based on where they live, where, their environment that also impacts our values and beliefs. So it is more complex, right? It's not as easy as not a straight cut answer all the time. So yes, definitely. Anyone else?
May I speak?
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
Flossie Girardi, former
Hi.
member of the board, and this has been great. So thank you, Barbara, and thanks to the board for still being in existence. So anyway, this is so nuanced, right? Because you say follow American culture, and so I'm not quite sure about that. And then, so if I identify as Italian American, that's a different kind of following American culture, maybe, than someone who is Irish American and following American culture. I don't know if you wanted to speak to that. I arrived a little late, so I might have missed something.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you bringing that up. I think, you're absolutely right. Now that I think of it, I should have defined. I didn't. I provided definitions in the beginning, but I didn't define what I meant by American culture. And I think one of the reasons was because it's hard to define American culture. I mean, I can ask someone where I grew up in North Jersey what being American means, and that could be a very different answer than someone from California or someone from the South, from, someone from Texas, whatever, right? All over America, I think there could be different definitions. I can tell you what I think of when I think of American culture is the answer that clients give me, right? And what I mean by that is when they say, oh no, I'm just American. When I say American culture, I mean not including any other ethnicity, if that makes sense, which is hard to imagine because I think that American culture is, there are other ethnicities intertwined here. We can't really take them out, from my opinion. But when people give me that answer, that's what they mean. I'm just American. I don't follow any other culture. I don't follow any other traditions, right? Do you get what I mean? Right. So that's what I was thinking of when I was doing this. So that's not my personal opinion, but that's the opinion I think of most people who give me that answer of I'm just American. That's what they mean. I'm just American. I just follow American beliefs. I do not speak any other language. I do not identify with any other ethnicity. I'm just American.
Okay, thank you. Wow. Okay.
Yep.
Before you go ahead, I also like what you said, Dr. Hannah, about, I think I wrote it down correctly, but it doesn't matter if I can't put it on paper. I thought that was pretty profound when you were answering the issue of what, quote unquote, what am I this race? Am I coming under race? Am I coming under ethnicity? But demographically, if there's no choice to make, it doesn't matter if I can't put it on paper, or no option for other, or whatever. I think that's a t-shirt waiting to happen. But, but that's pretty important to recognize, because as a therapist, that person could be coming in with that angst always. And if you omit that angst, you're also missing another identity of that individual, right? So their day may seem smooth, their day may seem welcoming, because you're assuming maybe they're in the majority. You might assume differently if they're minoritized, but I think in the majority, you might miss that, no, I can't put down that I am an Egyptian American. It doesn't go anywhere on this paper. So they are kind of coming in with their shoulders a little bit up, that therapists might miss when they're talking about why things and how things impact them.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It matters. The belief matters, right? The part of the debate for me, I personally don't think about as much, because I feel like there has been that debate going on for quite some time. And over the years, they have added it on there. They have clarified that white means Middle Eastern. A lot of papers I've seen clarify that specifically, so that people know that you're included in there. But yes, how people see, the internal belief matters, right? Because our beliefs, they shape us and shape everything, I believe, at least, right? Okay. All right. So why is this important, in my opinion, at least, right? Like I said in the beginning, assessment for me, continuing process, but very important during the intake. For me, happens during the intake, but mostly important for case conceptualization. I'm talking about case conceptualization as it refers to me as a therapist, but I'm sure other health professions also think of case conceptualization, right? It informs every part of my work. My hypotheses, my treatment plan, my intervention, everything is based on how I conceptualize my case. And if I leave out this very important part, which is culture and ethnicity, that leaves a very big gap for me, right? So that's why this is one of the reasons why this is very, very important for clinical assessment, to leave that out. I know a lot of wonderful therapists who do include this in their intake, but they don't focus on it, right? They'll include it, but then if someone just puts white or Caucasian, they won't really ask about it. Or if someone puts another culture, they'll focus on it too much, because they feel, this is really important for me to focus on it. But I think the word that I used before is very important, which is balance. Balance, right? It's not about going to the other extreme either, of over focusing on it, but not ignoring it. Or some therapists just don't even include that on there at all. They'll include race, but they won't focus on ethnicity and culture. I've seen that in many people's intakes. I'm not people I know personally, but I'm on all of these like Facebook therapist groups. So people share their intakes, they share the paperwork with each other. And I've seen it so many times where on people's intakes, they include race, but they don't include ethnicity and culture, which I think does a very big disservice, because it has a very big impact on people. This includes religion, traditions, everything. It shapes us greatly. It informs our beliefs and our values, which impact our behaviors, right? So, for example, if there's a behavioral therapist, which I'm not, I don't really focus on behavior as much. But if there's a behavioral therapist who's focusing on behavior, but not including culture and ethnicity, you're leaving out a very big chunk of why that behavior is even happening. You're just focusing on things like, whatever techniques related to stopping a certain behavior or adjusting a behavior, but not focusing on what's underneath it. That does a very big disservice. So I can go on and on about why it's important, but mostly important because it informs every single part of our life. For the people who give me that answer of, I'm just American, I personally think it does affect them too, but they're less open to exploring it. So usually I don't push too much with that, but I'll still ask the question. At the very least, I'll ask the question and see what answer I receive. I think at the very least, what we can do is just ask that question and see what comes out of it.
May I make a comment?
Yes, of course.
I was in transit, so I'm just trying to make sure I communicate with this conversation. I appreciate you bringing up the differences between ethnicity and race, because I'm on the board, diversity DEI board, but I'm also stationed at a site in Philadelphia, and I'm working with other people who are in their practicum as well as their internship. I am a grad student in art therapy, and it's very annoying that the other interns, the other people that are in their practicum or in their internship are not able to make that distinction between race and ethnicity and how they address the group. And it seems like it's totally out of their consciousness. So it's an uphill battle, and I'm appreciating how you're making these differences. So possibly when I go back to the group, I can be able to give them a better understanding of being able to address the population that comes into this facility.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know, the people that you work with. So this is a very big assumption, right? But I think it helps me to be able to recognize this more, even, before I even got into any of this stuff, because I'm a bit biased because ethnicity impacts me more than race. For some people, race impacts them more and informs their life more, right? For me, it has helped me greatly to make this distinction because ethnicity impacts my life a lot more than race. So maybe for them, race has impacted them more, or maybe because they hear about it more, right? So I think it's I don't know if you watched the first video, the TED Talk with Dr. Martin, but she was talking about how it's not just about trainings, but about experiential learning. And I think that is very helpful. And I think that if people talk to them about their personal experiences, I think that can help them greatly. Oh, is someone in the... Hang on. I'm not very good with this. Did someone put something in the chat? Because I'm not able to open the chat right now. It went away. Hang on.
I was just giving you a 10-minute warning, Barbara.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Would it be okay if I made one more point?
Of course.
Just circling back to what you mentioned about not necessarily having the option to click off certain boxes when filling out maybe an intake form or a demographic form. I was almost wondering if it would be a better format to leave those questions as fill in the blank or short answer with defining race, culture, and ethnicity, because people don't necessarily always understand the distinction, and having certain boxes almost limits the answers that people are able to provide.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, and I'm talking about this from one perspective, but there's also another perspective of, someone who's biracial, for example. I mean, there are so many different ideas for why your idea might be a very good idea. I honestly think it just makes their life easier to have it all, kind of grouped together. But I think that would be very helpful.
And I just have a question, Nicole, if you could answer this or maybe give feedback about this, because earlier, Dr. Hannah, Nicole gave you feedback about her father being from Hong Kong, and yet he was raised probably very culturally and ethnically different than Nicole was raised with having that background. But Nicole, have you come across individuals that were maybe more so raised similar to your father that expect you to have the same competency or the same knowledge base And then how is that sort of viewed if you say, well, I don't know what that is, or I'm not familiar with that?
Sure. I wouldn't say that I've had a lot of those experiences. I know that I have experiences within my family where I don't speak the same language. So we have a language barrier and we're not able to communicate as freely. Or I'll be out in public and an Asian person will come up to me expecting that I might be able to communicate with them, but that's not necessarily true because I never learned how to. Or they might assume that I am a certain ethnicity that is not what I identify with. And yeah, and even my father, who spent the first 14 years of his life in Hong Kong, he's also grown up on the Eastern Coast in Connecticut, actually. So I don't know. I think it's interesting the way that you're perceived is. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. No, I totally agree, which is why I don't like the idea of going to the other extreme either, of seeing someone who looks a certain way and assuming, oh, they must fall under this category of understanding this culture since they are of this race, right? I just want to clarify, this concluding, right? This, I already said this, but just to clarify, I'm not suggesting that we forget about race and the great impact that it has on us and our clients' lives. I just want us to be able to remember ethnicity as well and the great impact that it has on culture. And in return, the great impact that culture has on our lives and our clients' lives, because I do believe that just like race informs our beliefs and our experiences and all of that, culture also informs our beliefs and our experiences. And in return, our behaviors and our mental health. But even if we're not talking about mental health, just our lives in general. Any last thoughts or questions?
I want to follow with what Cassandra said, because your whole presentation today could be lifted up. Cassandra could take it and show it, right, at these other environments that she's in where she's struggling. I just wonder if you plan on doing any kind of paper on this, because I think it's so necessary.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. If it's kind of like a peer-reviewed paper, I would have to have some kind of support with that. But perhaps, something starting out, something a bit smaller, like a blog or something like that. Just somewhere to share my thoughts and see if it turns into something bigger. Like I said, I graduated last year. I left my job and I opened my own practice. So that leaves me with a lot of free time to do whatever I want to do, right? Like writing a paper, like possibly teaching. So I am thinking about next steps in my life. So definitely a possibility.
Well, will we have access to this recording?
Yes. Yes. I don't know where. I think, is it YouTube or I'm not sure where.
Well, go ahead, Darren.
Yeah, it takes us a couple of days to edit them out. If you go to the Tuesday Topics webpage, which I'm going to pop into the chat right now.
Thank you.
At the very bottom of that page is a link to our YouTube channel, and this recording will be on that YouTube channel shortly. We currently have a whole bunch of other videos that cover a wide range of topics. We've been doing these since 2018, and we've got a really solid library now. So lots of topics, lots of ideas. Please visit them and share as you see fit.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. All right. Well, with that, thank you, Dr. Hannah, for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see you next time for Tuesday Topics.
Thank you, everyone.